Today, we're going to continue the series on marching towards famine. In our first video, I mentioned that drought can cause otherwise healthy plants to become quite toxic. So today, that's what we're going to cover. I've added the first video to the database on this last tab. If you haven't watched it, it would be a good idea to check that out. Let's close that information panel. We covered a lot of the information about starvation and famine in the previous video, so today we're going to jump over to plants and climate change. Before we get into this, I think we need to clarify what we mean by climate change. Unfortunately, it's become a loaded term, and we're told that there's a scientific consensus about what's causing it. Some people claim there's no such thing as climate change. Others point to the science showing it's driven by the sun and the Earth's polar shifts and magnetic field, and others claim that no, it's caused by humans. So the fact is, we shouldn't think about this simplistically, and remember that the Earth has been going through climate changes for millions of years. I want to share with you some remarks from a very recent debate about climate change. This comes from an environmental scientist, Madani. He was also vice president of the United Nations Environmental Assembly, so he has quite a bit of knowledge on the topic. Let's hear what he has to say.
That we don't know a lot of things. Now, how do you manage something that you don't know much about? We hear that people have been able to adapt. For a person coming from an area which is a little, maybe a few thousand years older than the United States or Europe, I tell you that there are civilizations that have gone away. We don't know about them. Historians and archaeologists find them one after another, and including some in Iran. There are the people who didn't adapt, who couldn't tolerate, who were not able to adapt to a long drought, and they went out. Their civilization was washed away. They're gone. You don't hear about those who didn't survive. This game, we can in this game talk about the narratives that we like. The reason that we don't have a common narrative today is complexity. In a complex system, no one knows exactly what is going on. So now I can pick and choose the narratives I like, and 180 degrees are different from what we hear from our opponents, or say the things they say. The reason that both sides might be correct is because we don't know what's happening. Within complex systems, what we need to do is to manage and navigate through complexity. Tonight is the night of managing uncertainty while valuing ethics.
Okay, so let's jump into this section of the database, Plants and Climate Change. First of all, we have a very limited variety of crops at our disposal in the main marketplace. As plants adapt to climate change, they become poisonous to humans and animals. One of the major factors in the collapse of food production is that the plant varieties used for mass food production aren't set up to deal with drought conditions. Drought can cause many plants to protect themselves through cyanogenesis. We'll get into that in a minute. Through cyanogenesis, they produce high levels of cyanogens, which can turn into cyanide. That's toxic to animals and humans, and when rains come, possibly the plants themselves. Also, fungi may proliferate in these drought conditions, producing mycotoxins. Previously, mycotoxins were considered to be the downside of poor storage, slightly damp conditions, contaminating large stores of corn and seeds in particular. But it turns out they like drought conditions too. Mycotoxins have started to spring up pretty much everywhere. Elevated carbon dioxide, raised temperatures, both reduced and high humidity, as well as very patchy rainfall, all enhance the presence of molds in soil and across the crop world. The good news is there's a large and growing seed sovereignty movement, which highlights plants that can grow healthy food in both drought and wet conditions. Here's a link to a video about that. And another article you want to look at, Rebooting 50 Years of Plant Advice to Solve One of Nature's Biggest Challenges. The video that I showed you about the debate, you can find here, the lost Civilizations of Climate Change, and some other videos you'll want to watch. A really good one, it's rather long, is A Poison Chalice of Plant Adaptation. There's more for you to explore here in the database, and when I open this up, you'll see on the tabs more for you in terms of answers. Here's about a resilient garden, growing food in an unpredictable weather. This shows how flowers develop in response to temperature. Can plants help us avoid human-made climate catastrophe? Climate change and deadly plants. Living in poor climate conditions, a plant story. And then the prediction of plant traits in future climates in an Earth system model. So there's plenty for you to dig into here. According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, more than 20% of the land in the western U.S. was determined to be in an extreme of exceptional drought as of March 8, 2022. In fact, if we scroll down, this link will take you to an article showing how the U.S. megadrought is worse for over 1,000 years. How long could it last? This one concerns me. Aridification kills civilizations. Is California next? Here we have a video about how they're drilling under Lake Mead to drain the last drop of water. Lake Mead levels are dropping. It could soon be a dead pool level. So I'm just going to move on to show you a map of the current situation in the United States. This is where we are in drought. Now, during the summer, we often have temporary droughts here in Arkansas and other places, and that's this light color of yellow. Those of real concern, of course, are these darker colors, and we see there's quite a bit of the United States that is dealing with mega drought. Let's move on to talk about those pesky toxins. One of the big categories has to do with something called cyanogenesis. That's a chemical process in the plant that ultimately can produce cyanide. There are compounds called cyanogenic glycosides. I'm going to click on that so you can see some of them. Amygdalin, for example, is also called vitamin B17, and that one is well known as a potential cancer cure. There are a number of others here. So there are different cyanogenic glycosides. They're commonly found in the honeysuckle family, in the rose family. In small amounts, they're actually used medicinally as antitussives. You've probably heard about using wild cherry for a cough medicine. And of course, that would be something that contains these cyanogenic glycosides. They're in damiana leaf, kidney beans, peas, well, peas especially during drought periods. You may recall in the previous video that one of the forage foods is the bean leaves. So here's an example of where you need to be careful, because if you're using bean leaves as a famine food and there's been a drought period, those build up a lot of cyanogenic glycosides and could be very risky. They're not toxic on their own. However, when cell structures of the plant are disrupted, cyanogenic glycosides brought together with a corresponding enzyme, resulting in hydrolysis of the cyanogenic glycosides, which occurs when cyanogenic plants are chewed by herbivores or when the plants are disintegrated during processes like grinding, pounding, or in the presence of water, for example, during soaking or fermentation. They're considered cooling because they enter the Krebs cycle in the mitochondria and block it. Cyanide comes in many forms with many names. Prussic acid is one of the common ones. The body handles trace amounts of cyanide by adding a molecule of sulfur to create thiocyanate. And you can look up the sulfur glycosides in the database. Excess dosage overwhelms and poisons the body. Chronic consumption of trace amounts will rob the body of sulfur and iodine, leading to thyroid disorders. During and after a drought, if we are having to resort to foods that are high in these types of glycosides, increase the amount of sulfur and iodine that you're taking in. In general, all of the legumes are potentially going to be high in the cyanogenic glycosides. The clovers, the trefoils, kidney beans, haricot, navy beans, black-eyed peas, and lima beans. Black lima is the most toxic of them. Also, you're going to find a lot of it in sorghum. There's been quite a bit of work done on developing sorghum varieties that are low on it because that's an important forage crop. Also, Johnson grass, Sudan grass, some other forage grasses can be very high in it. You'll find those in the database. Now, if you want to get rid of some of it, let's say, for example, you can harvest white clover for a high protein source. The leaves are high protein, and in fact, they contain 20% protein, so they're one of our valuable protein sources. Ideally, you'll get that in the spring. You'll harvest it in the spring before a drought sets in. But if it's droughty and for some reason as a famine food you need to use it, you can see up here at the top that these cyanogenic glycosides are soluble in hot ethanol, but also in hot water. And that's the reason why it's recommended that if you're going to eat a lot of the leaves of the white clover, that you first soak them in hot, salty water and, of course, throw that water away. Then you can go ahead and use them. You could dehydrate them for later. Now remember, there are seeds available that don't produce these high levels of cyanogenic glycosides during drought. They are heirloom seeds, traditional seeds that peoples around the world have successfully saved in arid regions that are safe, and that's where the seed sovereignty movement is coming in. There's work being done to collect those seeds and bring them forwards. Okay, moving on to the mycotoxins. There are 200 mycotoxins from common molds that have been identified, but we know there are thousands of molds and we don't know enough about all of them. They're found in our soil. When pesticides and herbicides are used, they knock out part of the soil's healthy flora and fauna, allowing the fungi that produce mycotoxins to take over. Glyphosate and other herbicides prejudice the soil into producing toxins. These fungi can proliferate in drought conditions, producing mycotoxins. Previously, they were thought to be the downside of poor storage, slightly damp conditions, contaminating large stores of corn and seeds in particular. They like drought conditions too. Even 1 microgram can have adverse health effects. Eating food grown in contaminated soils increases our exposure. Processing can encourage mycotoxins to emerge. For example, in coffee and chocolate, the beans can become cracked, enabling mycotoxins to develop. Fumonisins, found mainly in corn and much processed food. There's another type called trichothecenes, found mainly in beers and wines. In some of the less well-crafted beers, grains that are unfit for livestock feed or moldy are used, taking with them all the mycotoxins. Then we also have the zearalenone. Those are one of the most prevalent estrogenic mycotoxins. They're actually used by cattle breeders to produce more milk, and they're linked to obesity and cancer. Unfortunately, with mycotoxins, cooking will not remove them. It doesn't matter how long you bake or fry or boil, it's still there. So what can we do about this? There are a few suggestions. First of all, this is a good reason to try to eat organic where these pesticides are not being used in the soil. Even so, we know that glyphosate is everywhere now. A study just came out showing that glyphosate is showing up in 80% of the urine samples taken in the United States. So that's one thing. But also, our wild foods grown on land that is not likely to be treated with these is probably going to be better. You do need to watch out for areas of where they do spraying for the power lines. But there are some other ideas. So one of the common mycotoxins is aflatoxin. You may have heard of it. Aflatoxin is one of the most common and most studied of the mycotoxins. It's found in dried fruits, oilseeds, cereals, corn, rice, milk, and contamination can happen at any time. It's a known risk factor for hepatocellular carcinoma. If we scroll down into the section on prevention and treatment, because it's so common, a lot of research has gone into what can be done to prevent and treat the damage resulting from aflatoxin. All of these herbs and phytochemicals and essential oils that you see underneath aflatoxin have been researched and shown to help prevent damage from this particular mycotoxin. Black cumin, turmeric, honey, ginger, clay, black tea, purple rice, bentonite clay, asafoetida, aged garlic extract, procyanidin B2 helps protect against the liver damage, pumpkin seed oil. So from this we see that there are some natural substances that can protect us. Do they work on other mycotoxins as well? That's the big question. These other mycotoxins haven't been researched to the same extent as aflatoxin. I do keep an eye out for anything that pops up which looks like it'll be helpful against these others. Another foodborne mycotoxin that's quite common is ochratoxin. It's one that is infamously found in coffee. There are coffees available that have been tested to be free of it, so if you're concerned, you might check that out. And there's a link right here for a source of coffee that's free of ochratoxin. It seems to be responsible, one of the things that's responsible for diet-induced kidney injury. Now, there are a few things they found that help with this. For example, quercetin, amla, and hydroxytyrosol. Let me just click on hydroxytyrosol because you may not be familiar with that. I'm sure everybody's heard of quercetin by now because its use is so widely known after the epidemic. That is a major phenolic compound in extra virgin olive oil. And I'm going to just scroll through to show you some of what it does. It's good as an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, cancer, candida. Just look at all. It protects the liver. It's one of the reasons we like high quality extra virgin olive oils. It's also in olive leaf extract. I also found something that could help with one of the trichothecenes. This one is called deoxynivalenol. Lycopene can help reduce some of the damage. This one's commonly found in wheat, barley, corn, and their products. And if we click on lycopene, it too has so many benefits. It's fairly well known for helping with high blood pressure. And where do we find it? It's in silverberry, Chinese yam, papaya, pink grapefruit, tomatoes, watermelon, goji. And if you want to look at the studies, of course, you can click here. I'll just do a quick scroll through. So the idea is if you choose some of these to deal with a potential mycotoxin, they may work for several different mycotoxins. We don't know, but they will also help with other potential health problems that you may be dealing with. So food as medicine, we see lycopene found in these foods is multifunctional. So another reason to increase it or to make sure you're getting enough would be to help with this type of mycotoxin. Now that we've covered some of the risks that drought brings to a dwindling food supply, it's time to turn our attention towards sustainable foraging. So in the next video, we'll jump into that. How do you do it so that you don't further deplete the environment of the food and medicine crops that we need? Thanks for watching, you guys. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.